China claims a 5,000-year history as the longest continuous civilization on Earth. But this longevity was not born from peace. The earliest settlements emerged along the floodplains of the Yellow and Yangtze Rivers, some of the most hostile, unpredictable environments in the ancient world. The constant threat of displacement and death from raging waters required massive human coordination to survive. Building the dikes and dams needed to tame these rivers demanded strict obedience and absolute central authority. When a man named Yu the engineer finally controlled the floods, his success elevated him to China's first ruler. Out of this struggle for survival grew the defining rule of Chinese politics, the mandate of heaven. This principle established that the universe itself grants the right to rule to virtuous leaders and violently strips it from the corrupt. For 5 millennia, this invisible engine would drive a continuous cycle of rising empires, catastrophic collapses, and bloody reunifications. By the 3rd century BCE, the mandate appeared entirely lost. Ancient China had fractured into 7 warring kingdoms, locked in a sophisticated and seemingly endless military stalemate. Looking at this map of the warring states, one region in the west held a military edge. Using mass-produced iron weapons and superior strategy, Ying Zhang, the leader of the Qin, swallowed up his rivals. In just a few short years, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. He immediately forced extreme centralization upon his new subjects. He standardized the writing system, currencies, and weights, and marched his peasantry to the northern mountains, physically linking existing fortifications into a massive continuous wall to hold off nomadic raids. While he wielded absolute earthly power, Qin Shi Huang was intensely paranoid about his own mortality. He ordered workers to construct a sprawling underground mausoleum guarded by thousands of unique, life-sized clay soldiers, heavily arming himself to conquer the afterlife. His ruthless legalism unified the empire, but the extreme cruelty and collective punishments broke his people. Just 15 years after it began, the Qin Dynasty imploded into rebellion, proving that the mandate of heaven violently corrects tyrants. When an empire successfully balanced centralized power with the welfare of its people, holding the mandate produced periods of towering global dominance. Under the Han Dynasty, the military expanded borders and forged the Silk Road, linking Chinese trade to the Mediterranean. Centuries later, the Song Dynasty fueled explosive economic growth by issuing the world's first paper money and weaponizing gunpowder. Yet every golden age eventually rotted from within. As populations boomed and wealth accumulated, emperors isolated themselves in their palaces, leaving corrupt officials to exploit the peasantry and neglect the military. During the Tang Dynasty, this vulnerability ignited the An-Lushan Rebellion. Rebel forces and loyalist armies scorched the earth. Famine became so severe that besieged cities resorted to cannibalism, consuming their own citizens as the conflict killed millions and shattered Tang dominance. Stripped of its internal strength, a fractured China could not withstand external threats. Sweeping down from the northern steppes, Genghis Khan and his Mongol cavalry obliterated the remaining defenses, allowing his grandson Kublai to establish the foreign-ruled Yuan dynasty. The very prosperity that defined China's peaks inherently bred the bureaucratic complacency that caused its collapse. The pendulum swung repeatedly from unified strength to bloody fragmentation. By the 19th century, the Qing Dynasty believed they could avoid this cycle by turning inward. Fearing Western influence, they strictly limited foreign merchants to a single port, attempting to hold off a rapidly industrializing Europe. Desperate to access Chinese tea and silk without draining their own treasuries, the British Empire found leverage by smuggling highly addictive opium into the country. Addiction skyrocketed, draining China's silver reserves and destroying social stability. When the Qing attempted to seize the drugs and halt the trade, British warships decimated the outdated Chinese coastal defenses. The resulting Opium Wars forced China to sign a series of unequal treaties, ceding territory like Hong Kong and paying massive indemnities. The humiliation of foreign defeat triggered domestic catastrophe. A failed scholar claiming to be the brother of Jesus Christ launched the Taiping Rebellion, a fanatical uprising that burned through southern China. Before it was suppressed, between 20 and 30 million people died of combat, plague, and starvation. Ravaged by Western imperialist exploitation on the coasts and a catastrophic civil war in the heartland, the Chinese populace realized the inevitable. The imperial system had irrevocably lost the mandate of heaven. In 1912, the 2,000-year-old dynastic cycle officially died. Following widespread military mutinies, the final emperor abdicated, and a fragile Republic of China was born under the leadership of revolutionaries like Dr. Sun Yat-sen. But removing the emperor did not remove the historical cycle. Without a strong central authority, the young republic immediately fractured into regions controlled by rival military generals, plunging the nation into the chaotic and violent warlord era. Stepping into the power vacuum, nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek commanded the Kuomintang military to aggressively force the warlords into submission. To secure his vision of a unified state, he then violently purged his former allies, driving the nascent Communist Party into the wilderness. This civil war was only halted by an existential threat from the east. In the 1930s, Imperial Japan marched into mainland China, forcing nationalists and communists into an uneasy alliance for survival. The Japanese invasion brought indiscriminate slaughter to the civilian population. When imperial troops reached the capital in 1937, they unleashed the Nanjing Massacre, executing prisoners, brutalizing citizens, and leaving hundreds of thousands dead in the ruins. To resist the occupation through World War II, Chinese forces engaged in prolonged urban warfare and brutal guerrilla campaigns, sustaining immense casualties to tie down the Japanese military until the Allied victory. Surviving the foreign invasion left China victorious but deeply traumatized and economically ruined. Once again, the fragmented landscape was desperate for a ruthless, unifying force to restore absolute order. Relying on massive support from the rural peasantry, Mao Zedong and his Red Army defeated the nationalists in the resumed civil war. In 1949, he established the People's Republic of China, bringing absolute central authority back to the mainland. Mao rapidly enforced total control over the landscape. During the Great Leap Forward, private property was abolished as millions were forced onto communal farms and instructed to produce steel in primitive, useless backyard furnaces. The policy was an economic and agricultural disaster. Crops rotted in the fields while workers labored at the furnaces, leading to a famine that starved tens of millions to death. To maintain his grip on power after the famine, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. He mobilized an army of radicalized youth, the Red Guards, to violently purge intellectual opposition, destroy historical artifacts, and dismantle any perceived threats to his ideology. Following Mao's death in 1976, leadership passed to Deng Xiaoping. Recognizing the limits of strict ideological isolation, Deng maintained political control while aggressively opening the Chinese economy to global markets and foreign investment. Through these reforms, the nation rapidly industrialized, pulling hundreds of millions out of poverty and constructing the dense, high-tech urban centers that define its status as a modernized global superpower. The emperors are gone, and the dynastic system that ruled for thousands of years is officially dead, but the underlying law of the land remains unbroken. The willingness to sacrifice everything for unity, stability, and absolute order to hold the mandate of heaven continues to be the beating heart of China.